Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Welcome to today's edition of Association Futures. I'm pleased to have back with us today Dr. Larry Paska. Now, I'm going to call Larry for the rest of the time we're together. He not only has a PhD, but he is a certified association executive with ASAE. And really interesting for today's broadcast is that since last October, he has transitioned from a previous executive director position at the National Council for the Social Studies to his new position at ACTFL, that's ACTFL, and I'm going to let him tell you what that's all about. He is responsible for overseeing the strategic direction, operations, and the staffing at ACTFL. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk about that transition as we progress today. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, and why don't you tell our audience what ACTFL used to stand for, or really does still stand for, and how the organization has decided to just use the acronym.
Sure. So our association was originally named the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. We were broken off from the Modern Language Association in 1967, and we represent K-12 classroom teachers, higher education professors and scholars. We represent school administrators, policy leaders, all working in support of language education in our nation's schools and universities and other educational settings. We changed the name because, a few years ago, we were kind of thinking that the word foreign in our name kind of wasn't really the right name for us. And, foreign can kind of have these suggestions of other or kind of a distancing word. So we decided to just lead with our acronym, and we created the tagline Language Connects that goes with our acronym. And we think that better encapsulates who we are and what we do, that we are, as professionals, connectors. And we believe the power of language is in connecting us all together. So I guess our bylaws, our official name is still the full name, but we do lead with ACTFL in all of our public work, our advocacy, and we're really proud of that change that we made a few years ago.
Well, that tagline is wonderful, Language Connects. I mean, it couldn't be any better than that, right?
Yeah.
Well, what we're going to discuss is this interesting thing that you've just gone through, which is transitioning from one executive director position to another. And so, as I mentioned to everybody, you were the former executive director at NCSS. That's the social studies teachers for all practical purposes. So, Larry, first, congratulations on your new role at ACTFA. And can you start by sharing what drew you to this new position, and what made now the right time for you to make this change?
Well, I had known ACTFL for years, just like those of you who are listening and watching in other industries. Professional associations within education are closely connected. We have our own discussion groups. We'll, get each other on speed dial when emergencies happen. We belong to similar advocacy coalitions. As executive directors, CEOs, we know each other very well. And so I was able to meet the previous executive directors of ACTFL over the years and had good relationships with them. I had a chance to learn about ACTFL through them. And a lot of times, as many of you probably do, you call your peers to say, hey, how did you build that membership model? Or how are you programming speakers at your conference? Or, especially during COVID, how are you managing non-dues revenue in a challenging time? So I had a chance to really learn a lot about ACTFL over the years through its past leadership. I had a chance to meet some of its staff, and our teams work together. I called on ACTFL sometimes to learn about how they did their membership models, or when they created a new foundation. When I was looking to do similar work in the Social Studies Association, I would turn to my peers. So it's through that over the years I got to know them, and I really admired the mission. I loved the work that they did, and I really respected that their focus was not just on language learning, but it's really about language learning to build proficiency, to build a sense of kind of multiculturalism, building cultural understanding and participating in the wider world. And those things resonated with me as a social studies professional at the time. And it felt like it would be a complementary fit to come to ACTFL.
Yeah, what a great answer there. And, it'd be interesting for me and for our audience to understand, what was most rewarding about your time at NCSS, and how did that prepare you for the new work you're doing today at ACFA?
Sure. Just like any association, I'm sure all of you can relate, no 2 days are ever the same, even though it may feel like we're often, especially those of us working remotely on Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, the challenges do vary day by day. And it's just like in most professional settings, especially those of us in education, just like in schools. Um, at the time, pre-COVID at NCSS, we were already pivoting to become more of a remote and hybrid workforce. And then when COVID happened, I still remember on March 13th, 2020, I can remember the day, just saying to our team, hey, take your laptops home for a couple of weeks. Let's just work from home till, we all feel safe to come back to the office. And then, as you know, 2 weeks turned into 2 months, turned into a year. So being able to fully transition that organization to be fully remote, and enable us to kind of pause on what we were doing and strengthen our non-dues revenue and our programs and services during that time, that to me was very rewarding. I was really proud that at the time, like many of you who are listening, we had about half of our annual revenue was through our annual conference. We were able to reduce that to about a third at one point, in our strongest. We were able to bring in other sources of non-dues revenue, start some programs. We received a few grants that enabled us to do project work beyond our normal scope of activity. That just felt very rewarding. So I'm proud that we came out in social studies out of COVID stronger than when we began in some ways. We had a strong board, we had a dedicated staff, we had amazing volunteer leaders who came together at that time. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that. The power of people really came together. And you would think with COVID and a lot of the fears at that time that we all faced of our jobs, of what was happening in our professions, what was happening to our health and safety, you would think that we'd kind of disperse. But in a lot of ways, people in associations that were already connected came together more. And I'm really proud of being able to see us through an unprecedented time. And I hope many of you have stories like that too, where COVID actually taught you things that made your association better in the long run, even though it felt very scary as it was happening.
Listening to your answer here brings up the whole idea of what was your approach to leaving well? Not just coming to the new, but leaving well. And how did you ensure that there would be continuity and leadership left at NCSS
Yeah.
after your departure?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's staying invested and staying involved until the very last day. I really encourage everyone when you're in that job transition, you can't check out just because you gave notice. You are responsible for your organization until your last day, and you are responsible for setting up continuity after you're gone. And my final day at NCSS was actually a keynote presentation and networking I did at our state affiliate in Alabama. And it was a little bittersweet that I had a wonderful experience. Again, I always loved coming to our state associations and meeting with them. A little bittersweet to be with them and then kind of get on a plane and come home and know that the next time I show up to work, I'm going to be driving to a different office in a different city. But staying invested is important. And I think always thinking about your continuity, even if you're planning to be in the role for a long time. I had a director on our staff that I promoted to a deputy executive director in 2022. Even though we were a small organization of 10 staff, that helped immensely because she knew about my role. I knew about hers. We were co-pilots together and leading some things with operations and with managing our volunteers. Even now, we still connect on questions from time to time. The interim executive director who replaced me was one of our past presidents, and it was one that I worked with directly. So he knew my work, he knew my style and how I structured things. But we talked very frequently during the transition and after, and always made myself available to help. And as time goes on, you realize your own imprint is less there, and it gets harder to answer questions and be a resource because you realize things have kind of changed. But I do believe, again, we're a small community in some ways of educators. We're in similar professional learning networks of our own. But I just believe that staying present and making sure that you are building a through line for after you're gone and making yourself available as appropriate after you're gone. Those can be things that really help your previous organization and also help you in transitioning.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Larry. And uh, on that same line, well, was there something that surprised you about the transition from one ED role to another? And were there any assumptions that you had to unlearn as you approached your new role?
Those are great questions. So, in a lot of ways, and I think what also drew me to the role is ACTFL is a similar type of association initially. So, again, serving educators, very similar missions. I would argue very complementary focus areas because just as in social studies, language professionals are focused on multicultural learning, on growth and readiness for the world. And so many of our members and those that we serve in career readiness, they're actively working in jobs abroad, or they're actively looking to boost their language skills so that they can be employed but also be engaged with friends, colleagues around the world. So all that's to say is the missions were kind of similar at first. Really, the big challenge was working with everything kind of doubled and quadrupled. So instead of having 4 directors, I was working with 9 direct reports. Instead of a few small teams, I had 8 teams. Instead of a staff of 10, it was a staff of over 40. Everything kind of was quadrupled: the budget, the staff, the scope of our work. And what also is unique about ACTFL is, in addition to being a professional membership association, we also work with a language assessment company as our exclusive licensee. We develop language proficiency assessments and they administer them. We also have a separate C3 foundation. We also have several grants and contracts that focus on career readiness, especially for those who are in government service, military service, on language proficiency. So we have these subsidiaries and separate C3s. So we address our mission in K-12 and higher ed and also in career readiness. So I think the transition was, wow, when you really have quadruple the focus and the budget and the team members, there's a lot that's already in place. You're not necessarily having to question every single expense, decision, thought. You do review your budget, you review all the checks that go out the door, but you're not always focused so much on every penny count, so much as looking at the bigger picture with things. So I didn't have to come in micromanaging every dollar or decision. There were structures already in place. A lot of it was contracted work that was required. So it wasn't like you're coming in saying, okay, I'm obviously having to think about how to change all this because I'm new and we have to change it. Instead, you're looking at it from, it's here, it's built, it's solid. What can I do to support it?
Yeah. So as a follow-up to that, so what are the key lessons from your tenure at NCSS that you brought with you to ACFA?
I believe very much in transparency, that being willing to change direction honestly based on feedback, trusting your team, thinking of the big picture in the long game when you make decisions that might have a short-term impact. But I believe first and foremost that you have to be willing to be sometimes uncomfortable and very transparent and certainly very vulnerable in front of your leadership team, in front of all your staff, and I think by opening up your thought process on decision making early, inviting your team members into that conversation and saying, look, I may have to change course, but it may be because of your input. It also may be because of circumstances. I think it's very important, especially as many of us are remote and we're just working together on these screens every day. We have to figure out a way to be literally virtually vulnerable and transparent with each other. And also just the recognition that associations, as we all know, are very unique. We in our roles as executive directors and CEOs, we're ambassadors of both the association, the profession, our leadership, our staff, our members. We always kind of have to embody that and package it together in kind of this forward-facing, proactive, realistic, positive way. And I think many people don't really we get, and I think we have to work really hard at advocating for this, that associations are a unique business because we're about people first. We start with people. Yes, we're a business and business is what keeps us moving, but we are an organization of people. And I think our challenge as leaders is to embody that and have it be that, anytime someone's on a Zoom call with you, they just look forward to you, but they're looking forward to the interaction with your organization. And that's a key lesson, especially, in a space like social studies educators, where they're very well networked, they're very well connected. They want to have fun, but they also are very serious about their work. Language educators, and just like all of our professionals are the same. We need to find a way to be that transparent leader, that vulnerable leader, that trusting leader, but also embodying the organization in a smile, in our interactions, in our openness, when we're on camera, in public, with others.
It's wonderful to hear you talk about that because as I was building questions for our opportunity here, I have a whole array of them here. So
Yeah.
well, we could go on forever and ever. But here's one that was really interesting to me that I wanted to make sure we get in today, and that is if you could go back and give yourself advice when you first became an ED, what would you say to yourself?
Oh, let's see. So I've been in an executive director role now for almost 9 years. So we're going back to 2016. There's a mantra in education that don't smile until Christmas. That you're supposed to be very serious when you're a teacher in front of your students. Don't smile. Don't show your personality. I don't think that mantra really works when you lead a people organization. And I would argue as a teacher, it didn't work for me either. I didn't smile until Christmas in my first teaching job, and that was a hard year. I smiled much sooner than that in my second job, and I got along well with my students, and I had a great time there. So I think lightening up, laughing, having fun, this is very serious work, as we know. I mean, any climate, I go back to 9 years ago, was a challenging climate. It's challenging now. This is serious work. It's important work. It's heavy enough. I would say to myself, this work is heavy enough without you adding your own weight and pressure to it. So I think kind of like what I said before, people want to look forward to being with you. They want to see your smile. They want to see your personal anecdote, your personal connection. I have seen over the years those things make a difference. And I always look forward to spending time with the people I'm spending time with each day. And I have to be cognizant. Like I would say to myself, be aware that you want people to want to spend time with you too, because by spending time with you, they want to spend time with your association. And when they spend time with your association, you get your mission done, like you're working on that. And I can't stress enough. We're all in very heavy, hard meetings a lot of the times. And I do find that starting off with the personal connection, the personal anecdote, the smile, the laugh, not making fun of work, but making light of the fact that we are truly all in this together. I would just tell myself, just remember, smiling's great, it's important, and your goal really is to make people want to connect with your association every time they see its name.
Sounds like quality humanization to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's ask this one then. So how do you balance honoring all the traditions and legacies of the organization you're transitioning into with bringing some new energy and direction, which obviously every new executive director is going to do?
So I've been blessed in both associations. In my first association, I was a former member and an active leader within its network. So in a lot of ways, I came into that role knowing the history, knowing the legacy, knowing a lot of the leaders and the focus of its positions over the years and its mission. So that was a comfortable space for me. Because I'm not a language educator by training, on the one hand, it's like, oh, I'm stepping into a new role. People don't know me. I was very blessed, though, that the interim executive director before me was a former executive director of the association. She was a long-serving staff member. She was a president of the board at one point. So a very, very dedicated, passionate leader in the community. She stayed on for about a month after I started. And part of it was the transition. Part of it was we had an annual conference coming up a few weeks after I started. So it was, I had a mentor with me who shared with me the deep history and context. Um, that helped immensely, that I could find my voice as a leader. But when others would approach me for the first time, I could say to them, I know about that, or yeah, I know that history, or yes, I heard about that. Tell me more. That was part of the connection. I think that people felt early on that I had a care for the association and an understanding of it because I had quote unquote done my homework, but I also was very open to the interim ED training me, teaching me, tell me the stories, tell me about the people, tell me about the impact that we've had over the years, tell me about things I'm going to need to worry about in this new environment. So probably for many of you, when you start new, a lot of the questions from people who are getting to know you are, why did you come here? Or why were you interested in us? And I felt that it was a lot easier for me to bring an answer of, oh, because I saw the connections already, and I've had some great training from mentors, from those on the current board. People appreciated that, hearing that I had already made that investment in the history and understanding the context as I started.
When people start new jobs, we always, if you read a lot of the books, they say, well, there's the first 90 days. What are you going to do in the first 90 days? So how did you approach that kind of listening and learning and the culture that was already there before you came? Of course, you mentioned the opportunity to work with at least a mentor of sorts for a month or so. So what was that first 90
Yeah.
days there?
They were very similar, which actually was also what was comfortable for the transition. So at NCSS, I started in October of 2016. ACTFL, I started in October of 2024. So both associations had its annual conference 4 weeks later. So my first approach was to, and I would joke with both teams about this, I'm staying out of the way. I'm not here to input my imprint on a conference. We're already finished with planning. Just tell me where to go. Tell me what meetings are important. Let me know where I need to be to shake hands and be the best ambassador possible. So that was one thing that was easy. 2016 and 2024, election seasons. So I am starting 4 weeks before a presidential election, and that was a little unusual as well. I don't know that many of us necessarily start almost 4 weeks to the day of an election. But that also helped me to say, okay, a lot of the direction our advocacy may take and the way we talk about our mission may evolve based on the outcome of that election. What I did focus on was a 6-month plan in both organizations, and especially with ACTFL, that's aligned to our strategic pillars. Around the 90-day mark, I brought our leadership team together. They are all remote, so we came together in person for 2 days to develop our own goal setting around our strategic pillars. I was able in the first 90 days, especially with 4 times the staff I was used to, of just assessing our current capacity. I would highly recommend, don't come in just changing structure, really learn, take the time to learn. I did have a leadership change that was unplanned before the 90-day mark. And rather than just restructure the team and go out and hire a new director for that team, I wanted to grow our own. And I thought, I have 43 staff. They're very talented. There's a lot of deep work that's happening. How can I elevate and grow our own while I'm able to assess our future direction a little further? So sometimes that happens where you start a new position and you have internal leadership that'll change rather quickly. My recommendation is, if you have the ability to assess your team and grow your own first, that's a way to keep continuity, to keep the structure moving while giving you the time and the grace to figure out the direction you're going to take things in through your leadership.
So when you were assessing the organization and the teams as you took on this new responsibility, did you do some one-on-ones with your staff, and how did you deal with the external impact that's happening in the world versus the internal always has been kind of stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, so I did start first with one-on-ones with each of the members of the leadership team, and those were kind of a quasi SWOT analysis of how they saw their teams and the work that they were doing. And then from there, we kind of set up weekly to bi-weekly check-ins that we focused our agendas around each of the 5 strategic pillars. So even though emergencies happen or things happen outside of those, I wanted to kind of focus on how are we achieving our strategic pillars so I can best understand how our teams see themselves in the overall work of the organization. Did a budget review. I also did one-on-one with each staff member. Those were great conversations, even though some of them were only 15 to 20 minutes at first. It was just a way, and again, learning, one staff member lives close to where I grew up. Another staff member lives very close to where my extended family is from in Wisconsin. So getting to meet the team members on their own, and a lot of those conversations were just tell me about you, and why are you here at ACTFL? What motivates you? Review of internal and external policies is ongoing. In part, I had a board meeting my first month, so making sure that the board governance policies, what they were, how they were structured, how meetings ran, that was my first duty. But as we got ready for our budget year and our fiscal year's July 1, that's when I started to look at policies reflecting our budget, reflecting our staffing, reflecting the way we work remotely. And I would say that's kind of ongoing. My audit of them is both ad hoc, like as things come up, I'll address them, but also timed to certain key milestones like our budget each year.
Based on your answer to that question, it brought a whole question to me I hadn't thought very much about. You said that they wanted to know about you, you wanted to know about them. Did they ask you any really interesting questions that when you were doing these one-on-ones that gave you reflection and need to think about the organization that you were coming into?
Yeah, I would say, and I've seen, and I think this was across like a lot of our volunteer leaders and those in our network that I've gotten to know, like our partners. A lot of the questions are, so tell me why ACTFL from social studies, and kind of curiosity about how I make that connection. Definite interest in languages that I've studied in school, as well as just, where have I been around the world? Do I travel? Do I enjoy traveling? Where do I like to go? I will joke that the language community actually is a lot more social studies than you think, because the key ingredient is that we value speaking, communicating. We value language as a gateway to the world, and so because of that, it does draw in naturally, I think, from the humanities and social sciences in general. And so I've enjoyed people just kind of saying like, "How do you make the connection?" And then when I share it, it just feels like we have a lot to work, we have a lot to grow on together as we get to know each other.
Yeah, that's certainly why that tagline for ACFA is so interesting,
Yeah.
language connects. And as we've gone through our conversation here, you've repeatedly brought that whole idea of connection up. I just think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So now here we are at our new organization. And of course, they have strategic goals and as we all know, there are board dynamics that you have to deal with when you're in your particular role. So, were there differences between the two organizations that you noticed? And to what extent did you have to deal with that?
Deal with differences in terms of so but let's see. So in at NCSS, our board met about twice a year in person and twice a year virtually. They also had an option for monthly virtual meetings. So it was more, I think, whole board. Although the executive committee, did take advantage of its ability to make decisions between meetings and would meet monthly and make some of the bigger decisions between meetings more. ACTFL, our executive committee meets monthly. Our board meets only 3 times a year and twice in person. And so I would say I have more direct connection with the executive committee at ACTFL and less frequently with the full board, but the strategic plans are very similar. I think they're focused on what a good strategic plan should be focused on for an association. We focus on how to grow and retain our membership. We focus on how we advance professional learning, how we're advocates in the field. So the plans are similar, and I think the structures are quasi similar. It may be the frequency of meetings, and when our executive committee meets now, we try to work through some pretty significant policy or other decisions that move us along between the general board meetings, which so far of the two I've attended do focus a lot on strategic oversight.
So when you come in new, of course, one of the big things, as we all know, is building trust
Yeah.
with the staff and the board, and of course the members as well. Do you have any advice on how you've handled that whole issue of building trust for yourself and the organization?
I think first when it comes to your team members, whether you have 5 or 55 or 500, even if you're making 15 minutes in the first few weeks, have the one-on-one with every team member. Just say hello. Just say, where are you? Tell me what brought you here, why you're passionate about being here. What can I do to help as I'm getting to know everybody? Those things I think are really important. we had monthly staff meetings. I call them town halls now. Try to make them not be things you can put in an email. We try some creative things. I will give everyone one tip that was kind of fun. One that we did about 2 months ago, we decided everybody had to create an avatar for the meeting. So a little fun to host an all-staff meeting as avatars. But you just think, working, and especially working with your team members on what would make a town hall fun or what would make an all-staff meeting fun. Doing celebrations, recognizing birthdays, work anniversaries, maybe other special events. I do a morning message every day. Again, it's kind of silly. I have the National Day calendar and I just announce what National Day it is today, and usually like a historical anecdote on this day in history, just to try to, have something fun to talk to. But we may also sprinkle on our Teams chat throughout the day, things like, hey everyone, create an emoji that represents this thought, and when you get more than a few team members participating, just ways to keep people engaged, especially virtually. With the board, I do a weekly highlights to our board. I did that in my previous association. I just like to celebrate with our team a couple of quick wins we had over the week related to each of our strategic plan goals. So it could be something as simple as, hey, for our professional development goal, we opened conference registration this week and we're excited. Here's the portal, and go in. For our advocacy pillar, it might be we signed on to this advocacy letter with a coalition this week. Here it is. I do value very much the open door. I structure a weekly one-on-one meeting with our president. We have a rolling agenda of covering recurring items as well as emergency issues, co-planning our board meeting agendas, making sure that you're available on speed dial to your chief elected officer as much as possible. And then with our members, just like in social studies, we have many organizational partners. We have a structure where we have regional associations, and our regionals actually have seats on our full board. We have our state associations. We belong to, oh goodness, close to a dozen different advocacy coalitions. So it's keeping our members constantly aware of what we're doing in these spaces. I'm just about to launch a new series I'm calling it Momentum. It's a e-newsletter, and it's just for the leaders of our regional and state associations, anyone that we call an organizational member. And it will also be a monthly leadership webinar series. The purpose of this is for the association executives and chief elected officers in our network to have a space for their own leadership development. So it's kind of ad hoc, it's informal, it's not credit bearing. It's just, we have probably close to 150 people across these networks, just bringing them together monthly for information and updates about what ACTFL is doing to support them, and for them to come together to talk about common topics of interest in association leadership.
Well, that's a real extension of your whole idea of connections,
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Well, look, when somebody new comes in, there's an expectation that there will be some change. And so, in terms of dealing with that, sometimes staffs and boards, they're almost fatigued by change, change, change. That old story that
Yeah.
the only constant is change. So, how are you dealing with that idea of change as the new leader in your position with ACTFL?
I think that in general, association communities are grateful for steady leadership. I'm sure that many of us come into our roles where there may have been an extended period for a search. It likely wasn't the previous ED left on Friday and you came in Monday. So I think because many transitions are lengthy, and ACTFL had an interim situation for about a year. I think the minute you come in, when you just project a sense of, hey, I'm excited to be here. I'm planning to commit long term. I'm not going anywhere. I want us to have stability. We're going to get to know each other. I'll have hiccups along the way. You might too. I think people appreciate hearing that you're here to be consistent. You are here for the long term. You're here to grow, and you're here to support. And I think the more you reinforce that early on, the more people see this less as a nervous, ooh, what's this going to be about? What's he going to be like? How's he going to change things? And And again, going back to transparency earlier, I think when you are planning to make some key big decisions, and some of them obviously you have to do confidentially or they're personnel related and you have to be careful. But I think when you are thinking even big structures, like I was interested in changing our annual review process this year, and I was transparent about it with our leadership team. And in that discussion, what I was planning to change probably wasn't going to fit what would be best for us. And I acknowledge that. And I think the more they see that you're intending to be long term, you're intending to be stable, and you're intending to really be a partner with everyone on this team who's been there before you and has a vested interest, that you're there to support them. I think that helps to steady nerves around change fatigue.
So how has your leadership style evolved between the two organizations?
I don't know how much it's evolved at the moment. It's sort of similar in some ways. I do like being hands-on. That is not a code word for micromanaging, or at least I try not to make it that. I started as a classroom teacher. I've always been very much like, let me, I just want to get it done. And I think it's a little more challenging in this role because we do have a larger team. We have a larger budget. We have a larger scope of responsibilities. So I think I'm still learning to balance where I don't want things to just be held up in my inbox because I didn't get to it yet. And I'm trying to, and I think that's where I am continuing to evolve, is how do I let go because it is being covered by so many other places. What I need to be able to do is support the work being done, not feel like I have to be directly hands-on with everything.
So what practices have you personally adopted to stay grounded, to be resilient in your new role, and to reflect on the pressures of the transition?
I think pacing myself with meetings and schedules. I'm very blessed. I have a senior executive liaison on the team. On day one, we were our first meeting together, and she kind of told me, "Here's how I like to block calendars. What do you think?" And so, because we're a fully remote workforce, I set core working hours where I'd like everyone available as on Teams and available to respond to things between 10 and 4 Eastern, knowing that we're in different time zones, but just saying this is a core time when we can schedule meetings together. But my colleague, coached me on, blocking Fridays for strategic planning time. I've noted in pacing myself, I try to structure fewer night meetings if I can. Even though some of our partners are globally, we try to work together to find a common time that's not intrusive for us. My fault is I tend to unblock my calendar. So I have colleagues that are very protective of me. I often have to work at pacing myself and protecting myself. So that's a me issue, and that's kind of related to wanting to be hands-on and wanting to say yes. And I always say to folks that in associations, we're here because we do want to say yes to everything. We believe in, yes, bring it on, take it on, I'll do it. And we do have to take care of our work-life balance. We do have to take care of our pacing. So I would say to everyone, do think about structuring meetings during a block when you can. Do try to block a day for your own strategic planning time. Do listen to your colleagues when they try to protect you. I know sometimes in our roles we feel like we can't show fatigue, or we can't show that we just have an off day or that we're tired. But when your colleagues step up and they try to help you get on track, listen to them, because they're not doing it because they worry you can't do the job. They're doing it because they actually care about you back.
So looking ahead, what really excites you about ACTFL's future?
Oh goodness, 50,000 things. I'll give you three. Uh, First is, like many associations, I really believe we are the gold standard in standards. We set the standards for language education nationwide. And what I'm so proud of is I had a chance to travel abroad a few months ago, and going to a high school in Taiwan and having the principal bring out a copy of your standards and say, we use these every day. These are our standards. It's very humbling to know that your association, the people you represent, have this kind of impact. So I'm excited that we get to represent the voice of an amazing profession of dedicated professionals. As long as humans speak, as long as we need to communicate, there will be language. And because we get to be the educators of language, I think we have a strong future. Even when there are a lot of challenging headwinds and cuts to funding and programs, we still very much are a vital, vibrant part of education. And I'm also excited at we do so we certify testers, we certify raters of language assessments, and I'm excited for us to look at ways that we can certify educators in the future as they work on their own career pathways to grow. Whether it's getting tenure, whether it's getting promotions in their schools, we're looking right now at how our programs and services can combine to offer a certification pathway for our members. So again, those are probably three or four things. There's about 10,000 more I'd share, but I'm just really,
I can sense all your excitement
yeah.
as you talk about these things. So now let's talk about the role of executive director here in this new generation of executive directors in this extraordinary point in time where there's all this accelerated change going on. Would you offer some suggestions or some ideas how the exec can succeed in this world of rapid change?
I mean, I think this notion of the leader as superhero is long gone. I think that myth has passed. We do need to balance how we are often seen as executives as the lead voice in many different spaces, but we do need to know ourselves and our limits. I would recommend leaning into foresight as a way to really structure your day and your long-term thinking and blocking a lot of the noise that can limit your focus on that strategic focus ahead. Maybe rambling a little bit or a little all over the place, but I do believe that we have to lean into our peers and our colleagues, hear what they have to say. And there is a lot of pressure on us in our roles to always be the leader with the answer. And I think the myth of that's long gone. And now it's more how are we the facilitator, the connector, the partner that empowers people to get things done. And that's oftentimes a hard transition.
Well, that sounds like very good advice to me, Larry. And
Uh,
so, speaking of advice, what kind of advice would you give another ED who might be considering a transition to another organization or position?
I think it's going to, I would say, think about the kind of executive you are or want to be. I think some of us can step into any executive director role and lead or manage beautifully, perfectly. It doesn't matter about the content. Maybe the board that hires you isn't worried that you're not a content professional. They want someone who's an association manager. That's great. I sought a content area I was passionate about. I'm a former social studies teacher. My entire career was spent working in education at different levels. I was at a state agency, local agency, a regional agency, a district, and social sciences, humanities, and education are kind of my homes. I kind of by design limited the number of options that would be available to me in a transition. When I was really looking for one that would complement my background and my interests. And I thought long and hard about applying for positions that I actually would want if I was offered the role. And sometimes we think we want a role and we go through the search and we find it's not the right fit. And that can happen. Um, but I wanted to start out by saying, if all things worked out well and I was offered this role, would I be willing to step away from my current role for it? And I always applied for a position, and I applied for ACTFL knowing that, yeah, I think that would be what I would do. When it's time. I would have stayed in my previous association and continued to be happy there and make a difference. But professionally, I really was open to a new challenge and direction. I thought it would be healthy for me personally. I thought it also would be healthy for NCSS, for my association. Um, I do think we're in this climate where a lot of times our tenures as leaders are very short. It is important for us to be in roles long enough that we can make a difference to carry through with what we plan to do, but our tenures don't have to be forever either. So I think know yourself, lean into your intuition when it's time. It's best to transition when you're actually confident and happy in your job and you see a future for it, but you also see a future path that could be compelling with new challenges and opportunities. And I think part of that balance is knowing, do you want just any leadership role or do you want to stay within the parameters of a subject area or type of profession like education, that kind of thing.
You've talked a lot about connections, responsibility, about making sure that you humanize the work that you do. So, how can executive directors, the outgoing executive director and an incoming executive directors support each other in the organizations that they serve?
I think, we talk a lot about professional learning communities. Join every single one you can, start any one you can, join formal ones, start informal ones. I co-lead two different groups online for education association executives. I've attended the Prometheus Consortium before their meetings. I'm going to ASAE this year. I have my CAE. I try to attend ASAE programs online whenever possible, certainly read the content that comes out every day. Even if you're not contributing actively to the listservs on groups like ASAE, just sign up for them, read them. I can't tell you how many times someone's offered a suggestion. I'm like, thank you. I needed to see that. I didn't know. I probably spend a half day each week just in and around these groups. You can't lead without your peers. And I've not met a peer, a colleague yet who hasn't wanted to join a group, connect with a group, start one with you. We all want that. We're all hungry for it. I think if we could do that all day, we'd feel really good. And we often are in isolated positions here. So again, join the formal PLCs, start informal ones, just stay connected. We need it just as much as we're giving it to all of our members in our communities in our work.
One of the things I hear you say, Larry, is always be learning. There's
Yeah,
always something out there to learn. You can learn
yeah.
from your colleagues and you can learn from other organizations. So, well, everybody has a legacy and they leave one. Um, from your own perspective, what legacy do you think you would like to leave to your organizations?
I think first that I brought stability and then I brought growth during challenging times. I do want to be known as a stabilizer and then a grower. And I say it in that order because a lot of times we often feel this pressure to come in and change, innovate, hopefully not destroy, but reconstruct or construct. And I do want to come in and say, I brought us together and I helped us to grow, but I like to think of it in that order.
Well, I have two questions to wrap up for us, Larry. And the first one is, do you have a word or a couple words that describes your leadership journey, and why would you pick that word or phrase?
I don't know if can I use two words? All
Sure.
right. I would say planned serendipity. There, many of us may not have traditional routes to get to where we are. A number of years ago, I kind of mapped out in my head, like, what would be dream jobs, like, in my career that I would like to have. And I thought of three, being an executive director or a CEO of an education association, being a dean of a college of education, or being a state commissioner of education. I was like, because those kind of aligned with, I was in a state education agency at the time. I was an adjunct professor in higher ed. So these were all things I was thinking of. I achieved my first one just after I turned 40, and I kept going because now I fell in love with the association industry. And I learned over the years that this is a perfect complement to my background, my personality, my skill set, the way I think. I'm like, all right, I had three dream jobs. I found my one and I'm not looking back. This is my dream. This is to be in an association and to be in this supporting role for our community all day, every day. It's exciting. So that's why I say planned serendipity. I was kind of having a direction, but then I kind of wanted to see where it would take me. And it took me right to my first thought.
Great, great thoughts, Larry. And hey, any favorite book or quote or leadership practice that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I had this email quote years ago, and I keep going back to it and I keep finding it online. It says, never mistake knowledge for wisdom. One helps you make a living, the other helps you make a life. And I always reflect on that quote. I think it's by Sandra Carey. I just see that quote show up and I saw it again recently and I was reminded that used to be my signature line years ago. I really do believe associations that we are ultimately in the pursuit of wisdom. We are in the pursuit not of just knowing things, but of making a better space, making a better world for those we touch. And I just see that for myself in my own leadership. I just don't want to be knowing. I want to be able to be um, in a position of absorbing wisdom, putting out wisdom, being able to create spaces for myself and for those around me where we can truly make a better life for ourselves.
Well, Larry, it's been a pleasure having you on our podcast today, and it sounds to me like ACTFL is very fortunate to have you around. And good wishes to you and the organization as you progress, learn, and succeed in this challenging environment in which we find ourselves. Larry, if someone wants to get in touch with you, is there any way that they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I am on LinkedIn and X at Lawrence Pasca. Also, I just give you my email at lpaska, LPASKA at actfl.org. Please reach out anytime. I'm always happy to connect with peers and professionals in our space. Maybe I'll run into you at ASAE. But Michael, thank you so much for the opportunity to share today. It's a pleasure to give back always to our community, and I'm always happy to talk with our colleagues about the challenges, the headaches sometimes, but also just the joy and the love that we do have ultimately leading
Well,
our associations.
yeah, thank you again for being with us today, and I look forward to seeing you out in Los Angeles at the ASA
Yeah,
annual meeting.
excellent.
Friends, this is Associations Futures, a forward-thinking podcast that delves into the future of the association world. Our mission here is to help associations and their executives navigate the ever-evolving landscape by avoiding short-term decisions, thinking of the long term, and anticipating trends for long-term success. Tune in again in 2 weeks to gain insights, foresight, and actionable strategies for your association's journey. Have a great day, folks.